All right, so Speak No Evil. Got our stack of reviews here. Seems like we've got a pretty even mix of people who loved it and hated it. Plus, we've got the IMDb page pulled up.
Uh-huh.
You wanted to dig into all the different opinions people have about this remake, so let's get into it.
Yeah, remakes are always tough. You're already working with source material that's established, so it's tricky for a new take to find its footing. It makes sense that people would be split on it. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And, you know, from what I'm seeing here, it seems like a lot of people went into this already having strong feelings about the Danish original. There were definitely some people here who were surprised by how much they enjoyed it, though. A lot of praise for James McAvoy's performance and a lot of comments about the changes to the plot from the original. On the other hand, you've got just as many people who felt like it was a cheap imitation and that it was missing that unsettling atmosphere and the more daring elements of the original.
Yeah, it's interesting to see those two perspectives clashing like that. It's almost like they're talking about two different movies. I feel like if you're going into this one totally blind, without having seen the original, you're probably going to have a much different experience. Like if you know a twist ending is coming, it's never as effective.
You know what I mean? Okay, but let's get into the specifics of this remake. Something that gets mentioned over and over again in these reviews is James McAvoy's performance. People are saying he is seriously creepy as the antagonist. I know you love it when an actor can just really disappear into a role, so I bet this stood out to you too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He's one of those actors who can play creepy and charismatic at the same time. He's really good at walking that line where you're simultaneously disgusted and drawn in. And based on everything I'm seeing here, it sounds like he's doing it masterfully in this movie. I saw one review that said he steals every scene, which, I mean, with his track record, that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. But let's talk about the storytelling itself. Because while McAvoy is getting all this praise, this seems to be where a lot of people have issues with the film. A lot of the reviews mention that it feels kind of safe, especially in comparison to the more daring and ambiguous style of the original. There's one review here that even went so far as to say that the ending felt very Hollywood. Ouch. I mean, does making a movie more accessible to a broader audience automatically make it less impactful?
That's kind of the big question when it comes to any remake, right? It's like, are you going to go on a roller coaster that's all thrills and sharp turns, or are you going to go on one that's more scenic and slower paced? They can both be enjoyable. It just depends on what you're looking for.
Okay, I like that analogy. Another point that this one review brought up was that the remake seemed to give the characters more agency, especially the son, which they felt was a stark contrast to the original's bleaker tone, where it seemed like things were always just kind of inevitable.
Hmm. That is an interesting point. I wonder if that choice pulls the audience in more. Like if you see the characters being more in control, does that make you root for their survival? Or does it take away from that sense of dread that so much good horror relies on, that feeling of, oh no, anything could happen?
So true. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like a trade-off, you know? So we've talked about what viewers are saying. Let's switch gears for a second and talk about some of the more objective information we have about this film. IMDb gives this remake a 6.9 out of 10, which is pretty respectable, and it's directed by James Watkins. You might recognize his name. He directed Eden Lake and The Woman in Black, Angel of Death. So he's no stranger to horror.
Interesting. So you've got a director with a pretty solid reputation for creating unsettling and atmospheric horror, and yet the reception to this remake is still so mixed. Makes me wonder, is his style strong enough to overcome what some reviewers saw as weaknesses in the script? Or is it a case where, if you're familiar with the original, those changes are just too jarring, regardless of who's directing?
Right. It's hard to say. One detail from the IMDb page that always gets me is this part where it mentions that the story was inspired by a real experience that the original Danish director had. That encounter with the Dutch couple in Tuscany, remember? It definitely makes you think twice about those overly friendly encounters you have with strangers while you're on vacation.
Oh, yeah. It's like suddenly this fictional story doesn't feel so fictional anymore. It's easy to imagine yourself in that situation. I wonder what exactly it was about that encounter that made him think, okay, this needs to be a horror movie?
It's like those stories you hear about people picking up hitchhikers or like renting out their basement to
Yeah.
a creepy stranger. It just makes you look at those normal, everyday interactions a little differently.
Right. It plays on our deepest fears about the unknown. Like, who can we trust?
Speaking of, let's talk about who we've got in this movie, besides McAvoy, of course.
Hmm.
Mackenzie Davis is in it, which is cool. She was fantastic in Black Mirror and Terminator. Dark Fate, so she's definitely not afraid of dark and suspenseful roles.
Hmm.
And then there's Scoot McNairy, who always brings this quiet intensity to his roles. He was so good in Halt and Catch Fire and True detective.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's a really strong cast. Knowing that these actors are involved just adds another layer of intrigue. You know what I mean? Like, you just know they're going to bring their best to the table, especially with this type of material. It makes me wonder if the scenes from the script that people thought felt kind of safe were actually elevated by the performances.
Ooh, that's a good point. Like, even if the dialogue or the directing is kind of predictable, a strong cast can bring a lot of nuance and intensity to a scene, which actually makes me think about something else that one of these reviews mentioned. They said that the son has a lot more agency in this version. Do you think that having such a strong supporting cast maybe allowed them to really explore those family dynamics more deeply?
Yeah, that's possible. Maybe instead of just focusing on the parents' terror, we get to see how each member of the family reacts to the situation. Like, do they come together or do they turn on each other?
Now that's juicy. Before we get too far into that, though, was there anything else from these reviews that stuck out to you?
You know what's funny? One of the words that keeps popping up in a lot of the negative reviews is unnecessary.
Unnecessary, huh? You mean like they didn't think they needed to remake the movie? Especially since the original wasn't even that long ago.
Exactly. It seems like they just didn't feel like it brought anything new or original to the table, just a rehash instead of reimagining. Makes you wonder, what does make a good remake? Is it just about getting a new audience to watch it, like a newer generation, or does it need to have something new to say?
Right, because like you said, if it's just a shot-for-shot remake, what's the point?
Yeah.
It has to have its own identity, right? Something that justifies it even existing in the first place.
Yeah, 100%. And it sounds like that might be where this remake falls short for some people. Trying to find that balance between honoring the original and trying to be its own thing is tough. And it sounds like they didn't quite stick the landing.
But you have to consider all the people who haven't seen the original, right?
Mhm.
They're coming at it with no baggage. All
Yeah.
they know is what they've seen in the trailers and stuff. It's entirely possible they had a totally different, maybe even better experience.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, art is subjective, right? What seems played out and predictable to one person might seem totally new and exciting to someone else. A lot of it comes down to your own individual perspective and expectations.
You know what else I think really adds to the creepiness of this whole thing? That little detail we talked about earlier about the original director basing the story on something that actually happened to him. Knowing that just adds this whole other layer to it.
Yeah.
Suddenly it's like, oh, wow, this could actually happen.
Totally. I mean, think about it. Out of all the experiences he's had in his life, he chose that one to make into a horror movie. There's something kind of unsettling about that, right?
Right. What was it about those people or that situation that made him think, okay, yeah, this has horror movie written all over it?
It's like he saw something below the surface that the rest of us aren't seeing. And that is what makes it so effective, you know? Our brains start filling in the blanks and imagining all these horrible things that could have happened, all the darkness just lurking out of sight.
I love that. It's like the power of suggestion. The stuff that's left unsaid can be so much scarier than anything they could ever show you on screen.
Exactly. Like, think about the difference between someone telling you a scary story and actually being there.
Okay, so we've got this real life inspiration. We've got a director who's known for creating a chilling atmosphere.
And don't forget the cast. They're all incredibly talented, and they've all got experience with thrillers and horror.
Right. And yet you still have all these reviewers saying that it felt safe and too Hollywood.
Mm.
It just seems strange that something with so much potential could end up feeling too predictable.
It is weird when you think about it like that.
It's like they had all the ingredients for an amazing meal, but they forgot to season it.
I like that. Maybe that's a good way to sum it up. If you're the type of person who needs to see something that pushes boundaries and subverts expectations, you might be disappointed. But if you're cool with a well-made but ultimately familiar horror movie and you love the actors, then there's a good chance you'll really enjoy it.
So as we go through the rest of these reviews, let's see if we can put our finger on what exactly about this remake feels so safe. Because it's one thing to say it's predictable, but what makes it feel that way?
Hmm.
Is it the pacing, the dialogue, the overall tone?
My guess is that it's probably a combination of things. Speaking of tone, one of these reviews said that the original movie really leaned into psychological torment and this unsettling ambiguity. Like, they leave all these unanswered questions, and you finish the movie with this lingering sense of dread.
Oh yeah, that feeling of, wait, what just happened? It can really stay with you. It's like the filmmakers plant a seed of doubt in your mind and then just let it grow.
Exactly. But the review I was just reading said that the remake seems to shy away from all that ambiguity. Instead of leaving things open to interpretation, it tries to explain everything and wrap things up neatly.
So instead of that sense of unease you're talking about, we get a nice, clean resolution.
Basically. And if you're someone who really loved that aspect of the original, that can be pretty disappointing.
I get it. It's like reading a mystery novel and having the detective walk you through every single detail. What's the fun in that? I want to come to my own conclusions.
I know, right? And that's what's so interesting about all these conversations about remakes. Should you try to capture the same feeling as the original, even if it risks alienating a new audience, or do you try to do something different, even if it means sacrificing the things that made the original so good?
That's the million-dollar question.
It really is, and there's no easy answer. But at least by having these conversations and really looking at it from different angles, we can start to understand what makes a remake work or not work.
It really is kind of like trying to do something that can't be done again. Like, yeah, the original was special, but can you really just bottle that up and recreate it? Or just trying to do that just make the new version feel less authentic, you know?
Yeah, it's a tough thing to pull off, that's for sure. And it's especially true with something like Speak No Evil, where the original was so effective because of those little subtle moments and the psychological tension it created. Like, if you take away that ambiguity, if you try to explain what's happening, do you lose the thing that made it so good in the first place?
Right. Like those magic tricks, half the fun is not knowing how they did it. So, like, what do we do with that? Should people even bother with this remake, or should they just stick to the original?
I think it really just comes down to what you're looking for in a movie. If you're a big fan of the original, if you loved how ambiguous it was and how it messed with your mind, you're probably going to end up disappointed by this one. But
But if you're going into it blind, if you haven't seen the Danish version, this could be a really solid thriller,
yeah,
especially with how good McAvoy is in it.
exactly. It's like sometimes you want a gourmet meal and sometimes you just want a burger and fries. They're both good. It just depends on what you're in the mood for.
I like that.
Oh.
So it sounds like after this deep dive into Speak No Evil,
Yeah.
the jury's still out, huh? No easy answers.
Nope. Which is fine. It's cool that art can make people have different reactions, that it can start debates and stuff. There's no right or wrong way to feel about a movie, especially when it's a remake like this, right?
Yeah, and honestly, sometimes it's more fun to watch a horror movie when you know you can spend time afterward talking about it, like dissecting everything and arguing about whether it's actually any good. So, hey,
Yeah.
maybe this will be one of those movies.
Totally. Isn't that what a good deep dive is all about, right? Looking at things from every angle,
Mhm.
questioning things, maybe even ending up with more questions than you started with.
I love it. Well, there you have it, everyone. Our deep dive into the Speak No Evil remake. No matter what you decide, whether you watch it or skip it, hopefully this has given you some things to think about. What works, what doesn't, and why there's so much disagreement over this film.
And hey, if nothing else, maybe this will make you think twice before you strike up a conversation with that overly friendly stranger on your next vacation.
Ooh, creepy. All right, on that note, we'll let you get back to your regularly scheduled programming. Until next time, deep divers.